I looked at my daughter across the kitchen table, the same kitchen where I'd made her lunches for 12 years, and I said, "No." She blinked. Her husband, sitting beside her with his arms crossed, didn't blink at all. "My name is Edmund Schafer. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil structural engineer with the City of Ottawa, and I retired with a pension, a paid-off house in Canada, and what I believed was a decent relationship with my only child. I believed a lot of things back then. My wife, Rosemary, passed away 6 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. In those 14 months, I learned everything about hospital parking lots, about the particular silence of palliative care wards, and about which of my daughter's qualities came from her mother and which ones came from somewhere else entirely. After Rosemary died, my daughter called every Sunday. For a while. She had married a man named Troy 3 years before that. Troy worked in real estate, not selling it, not developing it, but what he called deal sourcing, which as far as I could tell meant he identified properties other people might want to buy and collected a finder's fee if anyone listened to him. He drove a leased truck and spoke very confidently about things he understood poorly. Rosemary had smiled politely at him. I had done the same. My daughter Nadia, I should tell you about properly. She was a bright girl, genuinely bright, not just in the way parents say that. She won a provincial science award at 16. She studied environmental science at Carleton and graduated with honors. Then she met Troy in her mid-20s, and slowly, over the years, I watched her brightness get redirected, not extinguished. Redirected into his plans, his ideas, his next opportunity. I don't blame love. I've been in love. I understand what it does to your judgment. What I don't understand, still, is the morning they came to my house unannounced on a Tuesday in March and put a folder on my kitchen table. I'd been up since 6. I had coffee on. The radio was playing the CBC morning program softly in the background. When I heard the knock, I assumed it was my neighbor Bertram, who sometimes stopped by. Instead, it was Nadia and Troy, both in their coats, both looking like they had rehearsed something. "We need to talk to you about something important," Nadia said. I poured them coffee. Old habit. Troy opened the folder. Inside was a property listing, a house in Barhaven, 4 bedrooms, finished basement, listed at $740,000. Beside it was a printout from a mortgage lender. A pre-approval letter with Nadia's name on it and a gap on the cosigner line. "We want to buy this house," Troy said. "The numbers work, but the bank wants a cosigner with stronger assets. We need you to put your house up as collateral." I looked at the paper. I looked at my house, the one Rosemary and I had bought in 1991, the one we'd painted ourselves, the one where Nadia had grown up, where we'd brought Rosemary home during her treatments because she wanted to die somewhere familiar. I looked at Troy. "You want me to put this house on the line for a mortgage on a property I won't live in?" "It's an investment for the whole family," he said. "It's your home," Nadia said quietly. "It's just collateral. You wouldn't be paying anything." "Until I would be," I said. They stayed for 2 hours. Troy talked about equity and appreciation and the Ottawa market and how interest rates were going to shift. He used the word leverage 7 times. I counted. At the end of it, I picked up the folder, handed it back across the table, and I said, "No." Nadia drove away without looking back at me. I told myself it would blow over, that she'd call on Sunday like she always did, that Troy would find another angle and the house in Barhaven would become somebody else's problem. She didn't call on Sunday. She didn't call the Sunday after that. What I got 5 weeks later was a letter from a paralegal. I won't describe exactly what I felt when I read it, because I'm not sure I have language clean enough for it. They were claiming that I had verbally promised on multiple prior occasions to provide financial support for their housing. They were claiming that this promise constituted a binding commitment and that my refusal had caused them material harm, the loss of the Barhaven property, carrying costs on their rental, emotional distress. The figure at the bottom of the letter was $420,000. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that. The radio was still on. I called my friend August Brennan that evening. August had been my closest friend for over 20 years. We'd worked on the same infrastructure project in the early 2000s, played hockey together until our knees told us not to, and stayed in each other's lives through everything since. He'd been a pallbearer at Rosemary's funeral. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting. "Get a lawyer tomorrow," he said. "First thing." I did. Her name was Vera Hollingsworth. She practiced family and civil litigation out of a firm on Bank Street, and she had the particular quality I needed in a lawyer. At that moment, she did not seem surprised by anything I told her. "This is a pattern I see," she said, not unkindly. "Adult children with financially comfortable parents, a spouse pushing from behind. The legal theory is weak, but it's designed to frighten you into settling." "I'm not settling," I said. She looked at me steadily. "Good. Then let's talk about what they actually have." What they had, Vera explained, was nothing enforceable. In Canada, there is no legal obligation for a parent to financially support an adult child's housing purchase. A verbal promise, even if I had made one, which I had not, requires consideration to be binding. There was no written agreement, no transfer of funds, no evidence of any kind. What they were betting on, she told me, was that I'd rather write a check than go to court. They were wrong. The months between the letter and the hearing date were the strangest of my life since Rosemary's illness. I went through my days, grocery shopping, walks along the canal, helping Bertram clear ice from his driveway in the mornings, with this thing sitting at the back of everything. I didn't tell many people. I told August. I told my brother, who lives in Kelowna and called me every few days to check in. I didn't tell the people at my old workplace, or the men from the hockey league, or the couple down the street who'd known Nadia since she was 7. I didn't tell them partly because I was ashamed, not of anything I'd done, but there is a particular shame in having your family's dysfunction made public, and I wasn't ready for the questions that would come with it. What I didn't expect was for Nadia and Troy to not share my reluctance. I found out through August, who had heard from his wife, who had heard at a neighborhood event. Troy had been telling people that I had promised to set them up and then changed my mind out of spite, that I was difficult since Rosemary died, that I'd become different. He'd said this to people who had been at my house for dinner, to people who had held Rosemary's hand. I don't know if Nadia knew he was doing this. I've asked myself that many times. What happened next was worse. Nadia filed a report with the local Family and Children's Services office. The claim was vague, that I had exhibited erratic and potentially harmful behavior, that she was concerned for my well-being. It triggered a wellness check. 2 workers came to my door on a Wednesday afternoon while I was in the middle of making soup. I let them in. I shooed them around my house. I made them tea. I answered every question they asked about my daily routine, my medical history, my finances, my state of mind. They were professional and not unkind. One of them, a younger woman with careful eyes, asked me at the end whether I had anyone in my life I could trust. "My friend August," I said, "my brother in Kelowna." She nodded and wrote something down. They closed the file within 2 weeks. Insufficient grounds. But I didn't sleep properly for a month after that. August came over that weekend and sat with me at the kitchen table. He didn't say much. He refilled my coffee twice. At one point he said, "This is going to end, Ed. I promise you it's going to end." I believed him. I needed to. I want to say something about that period honestly. There were moments where I questioned my own memory, not because there was anything to question, but because when enough people look at you with uncertainty, you start examining things you know to be true. I found myself going back through old text messages, emails, anything from conversations with Nadia and Troy, wondering if I had said something that could be misread. I hadn't, but the wondering itself was exhausting. Vera told me this was normal. Doubt is a tool, she said. Don't let them use it on you. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in October at the Superior Court of Justice in Ottawa. I wore the suit I'd bought for Rosemary's memorial. It seemed right in some dark way. Troy and Nadia had a lawyer, a man named from a firm I didn't recognize, who carried himself with the air of someone who believed presentation was half the argument. He made an opening statement about family bonds and reasonable expectations and the emotional harm caused by a parent's withdrawal of support. Vera's opening was 4 sentences long. Mr. Schafer made no written promise. No funds were transferred. No consideration was exchanged. There is no contract. The plaintiff's lawyer called Troy first. Troy described a conversation at Christmas dinner 2 years prior, in which he claimed I had told them, quote, "I want to help you two get into something permanent." He said I had repeated this sentiment on multiple occasions. He was confident on the stand. Troy was always confident. Vera stood up. "Mr. Troy," she said, "you've described a verbal expression of goodwill. Can you tell the court what Mr. Schafer received in exchange for this alleged promise?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" "A contract requires an exchange. What did Mr. Schafer receive in return for this commitment you're describing?" "It was a family thing. It wasn't transactional." "So there was no exchange?" "Not in that sense, no." "Thank you." She sat down. Nadia testified next. I hadn't seen her in months. She looked tired in a way that I recognized. It was the kind of tired that comes from maintaining a story. She spoke about her childhood, about how I had always provided for the family, about how she had believed this would continue. She cried at one point. Genuine tears, I think. This is the part that is hardest to explain to people. I don't believe Nadia was entirely cynical. I think she believed by then what Troy had told her to believe. When Vera cross-examined her, she was gentle but precise. "Did your father ever sign anything?" "No." "Did he ever transfer money to you for this purpose?" "No." "Did he ever put anything in writing?" "No." "Did he say, specifically, I will co-sign your mortgage, or I will provide funds for your housing purchase?" Nadia was quiet for a moment, not in those exact words. "What exact words did he use?" She looked at her hands. "He said he wanted to help us get settled." "And that," Vera said, "is all." Then Vera called me. I described the morning in March accurately and completely. I described every conversation I could recall. I described the folder on my kitchen table, the pre-approval letter, the 2 hours I'd sat listening to Troy explain leverage to me. I described saying no. The judge, a woman in her late 50s who had listened to everything with an expression that revealed nothing, asked me one question directly. "Mr. Schafer," she said, "at any point during these conversations, did you intend to bind yourself legally to a financial obligation?" "No," I said. "I said I wanted to help them. I meant emotionally. I meant I would be there if something went wrong in their lives. I did not mean I would sign a legal document pledging my home." She wrote something down. Her ruling came 18 days later in writing. Claim dismissed. No costs awarded to the plaintiff. The court noted that an expression of parental goodwill does not constitute an enforceable financial commitment, and that the claim appeared to have been filed without reasonable legal foundation. Vera called me when the ruling came through. She read the key paragraph to me over the phone. I thanked her. I hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a while. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that. I felt something closer to grief, the kind that comes when the last version of something you were hoping to save finally ends. A door not slamming but closing, softly, for the last time. I have not spoken to Nadia since the day of the hearing. She looked at me once, across the courtroom, before she left. I don't know what she saw. I know what I saw, my daughter, looking like she wasn't sure how she'd gotten there. I sold my house in Kanata in the spring, not because I had to, but because I'd been raveling around in it alone for 6 years, and the rooms had started to feel less like home and more like a museum to a life I used to have. I bought a smaller place in Prince Edward County, a town called Picton on the water. Quieter. Good light in the mornings. August came down the first weekend and we sat on the back porch and drank coffee and didn't talk about any of it. We talked about a road trip we'd always said we'd do, out to the Maritimes, down through Cape Breton. We said we'd go in the fall. My brother came to visit in June. He brought his wife and their dog, a ridiculous old golden retriever, who spent the whole weekend following me around the yard. One evening we sat on the porch and he said, "You doing okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." I meant it. I was surprised to mean it. There's something I want to say to anyone watching who is in the middle of something like this, because I know you're there. I know some of you have sat at your own kitchen tables with your own folders and your own versions of that 2-hour conversation. I know some of you said yes when you meant to say no, and some of you said no and are now living through the consequences of it. Here is what I know. Your retirement is not their inheritance. Your savings are not their down payment. Your home, the one you earned, the one you paid for, the one you shared with someone you loved, belongs to you. You do not owe it to them. The word family is not a legal instrument, no matter how many times they use it. And if you have given too much already, it is not too late to stop. Barrett told me at our last meeting that I should consider setting up a proper estate plan, clear documentation of my wishes, a power of attorney in place with someone I trust, the whole structure made explicit and legally sound. I've done that. August holds my POA. My brother is the executor of my estate. Every decision I've made about my finances and my future is written down, witnessed, and filed with my lawyer. Not because I'm afraid, because I'm done leaving things to interpretation. The morning after the ruling, before I'd told anyone, before I'd done anything, I drove out to the west end of the city, the old part near where Rosemary and I used to walk along the river before the kids in the neighborhood started building that new development. I parked and walked for a while. The Ottawa River was gray and cold and moving fast, the way it does in October. I thought about the man I was when I was 35, standing in a different part of this city, pouring concrete forms for a footbridge that would hold up for 100 years if I did it right. I thought about what it means to build something that lasts. I thought about Rosemary. And then I went home and I made coffee and I turned the radio on. That was enough. I keep coming back to that Tuesday morning in March, the coffee on the counter, the radio going softly, the knock at the door I didn't expect. I've thought about it a lot since then, not with bitterness, but with the kind of quiet clarity that only comes after the noise has settled. What happened to me didn't come out of nowhere. Troy didn't wake up one day and decide to sue his father-in-law on a whim, and Nadia didn't drift into that courtroom by accident. It was a long sequence of small choices, his, hers, and honestly some of mine too. I had let too many things go unsaid for too long. I had smiled politely when I should have spoken plainly. I had told myself it would work itself out. That is not wisdom. That is avoidance wearing wisdom's coat. Here is what I believe now, having lived through it. The way a person conducts themselves when money is involved tells you everything about their character that ordinary life keeps hidden. Troy, when he pushed that folder across my table, showed me exactly who he was. Not a bad person in some cinematic sense, just someone who had decided that wanting something entitled him to it, and that family was a leverage point rather than a bond. The word family meant something different to him than it did to me. It took a lawsuit for me to understand that clearly. And Nadia, I have had to sit with the hardest version of this, that my daughter, the girl who won that provincial science award at 16, allowed herself to stop thinking for herself. That is not something I can fix from the outside. Clarity is not something you can hand to another person. She will have to find her way to it on her own terms, in her own time if she chooses to. What I know is what I did. I did not sign. I did not settle. I did not let the social pressure of what people might think override what I knew to be right. That took more out of me than I expected. There were nights, several of them, where I genuinely questioned whether it was worth it, whether it would have been easier to just write a check and be done with it. It would have been easier in the short term, and it would have cost me something I cannot name, but would have felt in my chest every morning for the rest of my life. Barrow was not just my lawyer. She was a steady mind when mine was rattled. August was not just my friend. He was the person who sat at my table and refilled my coffee without saying anything that needed to be said. Having people like that, people whose judgment you trust and whose presence anchors you, is not luck. It is the result of years of showing up honestly for others. That comes back to you, not in a mystical sense, just in the plain human sense that decent people tend to find each other over time. I am not the same man I was before that folder landed on my kitchen table. I am more careful with my words now, more deliberate with what I promise and what I don't, more willing to say a hard thing in the moment, rather than leave it for later to become something worse. And I am, I think, a little more at peace with what I cannot control. The river in Ottawa keeps moving whether you watch it or not. That October morning, standing on the bank, I understood that the current doesn't care about your lawsuit or your daughter or your grief. It just moves. At some point, you decide whether you're going to stand there frozen or whether you're going to turn around and go home and make coffee. I turned around,